Don't worry, Meli. Just try to pretend like you're on vacation. This is gonna be one damn long vacation. Oh girl, you have no idea. Hi guys, welcome to the final chapter, chapter 18 of the Castor Saga. If you're new here, we have an entire book's worth of chapters on a playlist for you, as well as the official book trailer. Go check those out. Spoiler alert, this is chapter 18, the final chapter of book 1. Chapter 18, The Adventure Begins. Tony woke up the next morning because he heard Zane walking around, flipping people's hammocks upside down. "That's right, newbies. It starts with discipline. Consider me your drill sergeant. Everybody up. Breakfast and casting practice for the newbies. Come on, everybody wake up." Tony sat up before Zane could get over to flip him. He saw that Zane was going to flip Meli's hammock, though, and grabbed his hand before he could grab the hammock. How about no? Whoa, Tony, calm down. I do this all the time. It's the only thing that gets her out of bed some days. You shouldn't flip her. She flips me all the time. Just not when she's sleeping. I'll wake her up, aight? Aight. Zane started to walk away, but Tony still had a hold of his wrist and lower arm, and he couldn't get out of his grip. He looked at Tony with a slightly scared expression, and Tony had a slightly mischievous smirk on his face. "And Zane, if you ever try to flip me, you probably don't want to go to sleep that night." Tony's eyes flashed purple as he squeezed Zane's wrist, then dropped it, letting him go. Zane kind of trembled with a nervous laugh as Tony let go of him, and then went back to his kind, caring expression that he had most often. Zane walked away, and went on waking everyone else. Jay and Joey were already up, and they laughed at Zane's little encounter with Tony. Tony leaned over to Meli and gently touched her shoulder, shaking her to wake up. He spoke softly so that he wouldn't disturb her too much. "Meli, time to wake up, hun." Meli rolled over and looked at Tony with wide eyes and a smile. "Oh, is it morning already?" "I'm afraid so." Meli laughed, then they got dressed and ready, as did everyone else. Jay and Joey were sitting up by the forest opening to the cave, looking down, when Zane walked over to them. Adam and Luke were standing there talking and heard what Zane said to the two brothers. Hey guys." Jay and Joey looked at him as he walked up by them. "I'm not sure how I feel about that Tony guy." "Because he wouldn't let you flip our sister while she was asleep. He just cares about her." "No, that's not it." This was the point of the conversation where Adam and Luke started paying a little more attention. "We all care about Meli. The fact that I couldn't flip her isn't what bothers me. I don't really know what it is about him. But Tony, he was so strong. Like, scary strong. And he's barely had any experience with his abilities. He didn't even know he was a caster until he followed Meli onto the train. They told me that last night." "Spit it out, Zane. I'm getting bored." "My point is, did you see him grab my arm?" "Yeah, so what?" "I felt so afraid in that moment. It was like I'd forgotten how to do anything. Now, you know it takes a lot to intimidate me, let alone that kind of pure fear. When his eyes flashed, they flashed purple, and it was like he was a completely different person, like he's playing a part or acting, and in that moment he broke character and showed his true colors, you know? You said he's supposed to be a time warper, right?" "Yeah." "Well, what if he's more?" "You mean like a caster of death kind of thing?" Zane nodded, and then Luke walked up to them as Adam stood right behind them. "I highly doubt he's a caster of death. While I understand the similarities, I'm a pretty good healer. I've helped him when he was injured before. I think I would have noticed if that were the case. Plus, he probably..." Luke stuttered off, thinking to himself, but Zane shook him back to reality. "Luke, probably what?" "Huh? Oh, I was gonna say he wouldn't have noticed when he was originally hurt until he saw the injury, but what?" "That's just it. He didn't notice his injury until he saw it." "Are you trying to say that my sister is a caster of life and her casting partner is a caster of death? Because if that's what you're saying, you better have some serious evidence to back that up." Suddenly, from behind them, Tony and Meli walked up hearing the conversation. "Will word of mouth do?" They all froze, then turned slowly, seeing Tony and Meli sitting there smirking at them. "You heard that whole conversation, didn't you?" "Pretty much, yeah." Tony and Meli were both smiling at them, kind of just waiting for a reaction. "We didn't mean to talk about you behind your back. We were just trying to figure you out. It usually doesn't take this much digging for us. You're a bit deeper." "Yeah, Sorry about that. Also, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but as far as I know, I'm not a caster of death. I'm just a time warper. Just a time warper. Tony looked back at Zane and smiled kindly, just as he had smiled at Adam when he was trying to talk to him yesterday. I'm sorry if I frightened you. It's a little habit I've seemed to develop while learning about my abilities. I get kind of scary when I'm angry. And I wasn't even really angry, just slightly annoyed. What exactly was that when you flashed your eyes purple? A growl came from inside you. Oh, Meli says it's my inner spirit animal. I'm a black panther. Jay looked at him with a curious smile. Really? How interesting. I thought only we could do that. It was Meli's idea. Yeah, she taught us how to all make our eyes glow our specific colors. She taught Tony a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Yeah, that sounds like something Meli would do. Meli smiled, standing beside Tony as she grabbed onto his arms shyly. It's okay, Meli. You're brilliant. I don't think they're criticizing you. Right, guys? Tony looked up at Joey, who immediately tried to apologize, realizing he may have embarrassed his sister. No, of course not. No criticisms here. She smiled, blushing, then walked away. I'll, go make sure everyone else is ready. Meli walked past her brothers, and they nodded to her, recognizing her as she did. Tony leaned against a rock and closed his eyes, bowing his head forward. He was kind of meditating, something he used to do a lot. What are you doing, Tony? Tony looked up at them with a confused face, then smiled as he processed the question. Oh, just meditating, thinking to myself. You do that often? Yeah. Why? Just curious. I noticed that you're incredibly strong. Do you know how you do that? Not really. I guess I'm just the strong, silent type. You are many things, Tony dear, but I would never call you silent. More like sarcastic. Meli had brought the others all over and gathered below them. She ran up by Tony and grabbed onto his arm as he stood there, arms crossed his chest. Sarcastic, huh? He kind of smirked at her as she stood beside him. Yeah, you're strong, sure, but you're also sarcastic and funny and very smart. Strength means nothing unless you know how to use it, and you do. Tony smiled, putting his arm around her. Thanks, Mels. Now come on, guys. Am I the only one who's excited to blow some shit up? Like, really? Jay and Joey kind of smirked at her, then stood from the rocks they were sitting on and motioned to everyone behind them. Let's go. They all ran outside and ran off into the trees to a little open area that they often trained in. Jay explained who would be in what teams, then gave them tasks. Jay's team consisted of himself, Tony, and Meli. Their team would take the Arctic route up by Alaska, down around the bottom of the southern Greenland shore, over the top of Europe, where they'd meet up with Zane's team. Then they'd continue over Russia and meet up with the others in Tokyo, before heading across the Pacific to come home. Any pirates they met along the way would be dealt with accordingly. Joey's team consisted of himself, Christian, Rye, and Luke. They would take the central and southern route, beginning their journey through the Panama Canal, then sailing over the north part of South America. They would then sail down the west coast of Africa until they went completely around the continent. They'd finish their journey sailing over northern Australia and the Philippines, where they'd take a sharp turn north and meet up with everyone else in Tokyo. Zane's team consisted of himself, Adam, and Keith. They would also sail through the Panama Canal, but unlike Joey's group, they would go north up into Europe to defend any towns up there from pirates who had been landing in Italy and places close by. They would then use rivers and small boats to travel north through western Russia and Europe until they met up with Jay's team and accompanied them the rest of the way on their journey to Tokyo to meet up with the others and return home. Jesse's team consisted of Jesse, Carlin, and Eej. They had been assigned the most southern route by Jay. They'd sail down from North America and would round the tip of South America. They would sail up the east side of South America before heading over to Africa and sailing up between the mainland and Madagascar. They would take a sharp turn and sail down between the southern Australian and New Zealand border before turning north and meeting Jay and everyone else in Tokyo. Once everyone met in Tokyo, they'd all get on the main ship and cross the Pacific Ocean together on their way back home. Jay made it very clear that no one was to cross the Pacific until everyone was together. He didn't want anyone crossing the middle by themselves. The Ring of Fire is the most dangerous part of the sea, and Jay knew they'd stand a better chance crossing all together. Any pirates they met along the way would be dealt with by circumstance. The ships they would be taking were magical, so the trips wouldn't take as long as they would on a normal ship. Jay made sure everyone was clear on the plan. Then Joey and his team went fishing for breakfast, while the others practiced with their new brothers. It was an easy day learning what everyone was capable of. They rested that evening and talked, and it were as if they were one big family. Everyone went to bed early, so they could get up early the next morning. Everyone was rushing around gathering things into their bags, then shrinking their bags down so they could hold them on their belts. They walked from the cave, out the ocean side opening, and down a little path on the side of the cliff. They had to walk quite a ways before they finally came down to an old road. Following Jay down the road, the group walked about a mile into an old shipping port town. They walked down the docks, and Tony looked around at all the ships. There were so many different kinds that he hadn't seen before. Many were cargo ships. Some were fishing vessels, although some were personal ships like sailboats. The town seemed almost magical, as if it were filled with nothing but castors and magical creatures. Tony caught up to Jay as they all walked, and asked him the things on his mind. "Hey Jay, what town is this? Are we still in Oregon?" "Yeah, we're still in Oregon. Nahama's in Oregon too. This is Kulu Bay. Lots of boats come in here. We, however, are all catching a boat north of Florin, Oregon. There we will go in our teams on different ships that I've had a buddy of mine set up." "Anyone we know, Jay?" "Nah, you've never met him. He's got a fleet of ships and he uses them to transport casters to other locations." "What's he take his payment?" "Well, for his transport ships he doesn't really charge, but there's a reason for that. He's, a bit of a pirate." "What? Seriously? We're using pirate ships to track down and fight other pirates?" "Well, yeah, no other ships are fast enough and he owes me a favor." "That's quite the favor." "Yeah, maybe, but he owes me a big one." "Why?" "I've bailed his ass out a couple of times." "I'm surprised we haven't heard of him." "Well, he kind of likes to keep a low profile." "Why?" "His ship's really old and it's kind of legendary. He and his crew are all casters." "Oh, have I heard of this ship?" "Maybe. Ever heard of the Queen Anne's Revenge?" "Yes." "No way. We're going on Blackbeard's ship?" "Yes. Tony, Meli, and I will be with the captain on the main ship, taking the northern route, while everyone else goes in their teams on his passenger ships around to wherever the attacks are happening." "Oh man, Lucky! Great job, Jay. This may actually work." "Don't my plans usually work?" "Yeah, usually." "Wait, Blackbeard would be like hundreds and hundreds of years old. Who's the captain?" "Blackbeard's most recent descendant grandson. He goes by Blackwood." "Blackwood. Yeah, he's..." Jay glanced at Meli, then leaned over whispering to Tony. "Keep an eye on Meli when he's around." Tony nodded, but Meli heard what Jay had said. "Guys, I'm not a child. I can take care of myself." "Meli, you don't..." "I'll be fine, Tony. Like I said before, I don't need a babysitter." They laughed as they all walked on board the boat, and it quickly took them north to Florin, Oregon. When they arrived on the docks in Florin, they almost immediately noticed all the beautiful older ships. Jay walked down the dock and gestured to Jesse and his team to one of the ships. "This is your ship, guys. Just let them know who you are, and see you in Tokyo." Jesse nodded, and he and his team boarded the ship. Jay and the others walked a little further, and then Jay gestured to Zane. "This is your ship, Zane. Be careful, and watch each other's backs." Zane nodded, and he and his team boarded the ship. They walked down to the next boat, and Jay hugged Joey, then motioned to him and his team. "Be careful, Joey. Get to the meeting point safely, okay?" "We will, Jay. You guys be safe, too." Meli hugged Joey, then he smiled, and he and his team boarded the ship. Jay, Tony, and Meli were the last to board their ship, because the other ships had to leave before the main ship pulled up to give it plenty of room. It was really big. The Queen Anne's Revenge was just as beautiful as ever, but was magically disguised as a cargo ship, so it wouldn't be recognized by non-casters. The ship pulled up, and the crew got off and began going to gather supplies. The ship wouldn't leave until later that night, so Meli, Tony, and Jay boarded, and then went to the room where the three of them would be staying. The captain's quarters were on the second deck. They would stay in the quarters on the main deck. The crew stayed below deck, like on a normal ship. They hung their hammocks and stayed in their room most of the day, and then rested overnight. The next morning, they could hear the waves crashing against the boat, and the sun was shining brightly into the room. Meli was standing out on the balcony that led out to the back of the ship. Tony saw her and walked out behind her while Jay was still getting dressed. Tony came up behind her and touched her shoulder gently. "What you thinking, Meli?" Meli turned and hugged him as he stood beside her, smiling down at her. "So much has happened in such a short time, and now we're going off on some other adventure. Did you ever think getting on that train would end you up here with me?" "You know, I didn't really care where. I just knew I'd be with you." Meli smiled up at him and looked him in the eyes as he stared down at her. "What about your mom? We didn't even look for her." "You know, if the Garden Lily is a corrupt place, then I'd like to think my mother isn't there. And if she is, I don't want to know about it. Melly's smile grew bigger. She stared up at him lovingly. Are you happy you got on the train? Of course, Melly. Why, Tony? You know, I don't really know. I guess I was just ready for a change, and you were the perfect reason to try something new. Melly laughed as he said that and messed up her hair on top of her head. You're crazy, Tony. Yeah, well, good thing I am. Takes a crazy person to get on that damn train in the first place. She laughed again, and they stood there staring out at the sea. Jay came out on the balcony with them with a smile on his face. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, it is. You always wanted to be a pirate, didn't you, Jay? Yeah, a little. It always sounded fun. Luckily, we get to try it without the commitment. Melly laughed and hugged her brother, then walked back into their room. Tony stood there by Jay, looking out at the sea beside him. What do you think, Tony? You ready to be a rebel? You're not really rebels, more like superheroes, you know? Oh, really? Yeah, I mean, think about it. Extraordinary abilities, helping people everywhere, and you have a secret cave lair. You're basically superheroes. Jay laughed and looked out at the ocean, taking a deep breath. You ever wonder what else is out there? Things nobody else even knows about? Well, yeah, a month ago I didn't know I'd be here, or that I'd get to see any of this amazing stuff. Yeah, well, just think. Other people are going to read all the books Melly writes about our adventures and think they're complete fiction. It's too bad people have lost their creativity and ability to believe in something they can't see. Yeah, well, I'll admit I used to be that person, till I took that leap onto the train, though. Well, I'm glad you did, Tony. We're going to need you. Well, I'm here to help. Jay paused a moment, then looked at him with a serious face. Just promise you won't hurt Melissa, all right? On my honor. Tony raised his right hand, and Jay laughed as he turned and walked back into the room. Good. Don't make me regret pulling you up on that damn train. What? Tony didn't hear what Jay had said completely, but it sounded as if Jay didn't want him to. Oh, nothing. Come on, Melly's waiting. Tony stood there a moment thinking, and then he remembered. Someone had helped him to get onto the train. Someone had pulled him over the railing, and then they vanished as quickly as they had appeared. He remembered seeing 4 dark, strange figures, but he hadn't seen their faces. Who were the stowaways? Were they Melly's brothers? No, they couldn't be. They weren't even at the train station. But then again, Zane did say that he followed Melly through to make sure she was safe. Tony didn't know what to think, but at the moment, he didn't have time to think about it. Tony, are you coming? Oh, coming, Melly. Tony walked into the room, completely forgetting about his previous thoughts, and he walked over beside Melly and Jay, who were over by the door. Come on, guys, let's go see the ship. Yeah, the captain actually wants to meet you guys anyway. Melly, Jay, and Tony walked out of their quarters onto the main deck and saw many men hustling around to get their jobs done. It was like they'd stepped onto an old pirate ship from the 1700s. They looked down at their clothing and immediately realized that it had morphed into old pirate-looking clothing. Jay seemed unaffected by it, as if he'd seen it happen before. But Melly and Tony were slightly confused, yet fascinated. It must have been a feature of the magical ship. At least, that's what they assumed. Jay leaned over to them and slightly shouted to them with a louder voice above all the noise. Try and keep out of the way. Let them work. Captain's probably on the upper deck. Let's go see him. Tony and Melly looked at each other and smiled, then followed Jay walking around the obstacles as they made their way over to the stairs. Melly looked behind her as they climbed the stairs and had a better view. All the crewmen looked like the same crew you'd imagine on the Queen Anne's Revenge hundreds of years ago. The ship had changed after they left the port, and appeared to be exactly like it was in the old days. Melly looked at Tony, and he could tell she was nervous. If the crew and the ship looked like they never left the 1700s, maybe they didn't. That's not possible. Otherwise, Blackbeard would still be sailing instead of his grandson. Well, if the ship looks genuine, and we look like genuine pirates, I wonder what the captain's like. I don't know, but just try to relax, Melly. Jay and I are right beside you. Pretend we're on a cruise ship on vacation or something. That'll help you relax. They followed Jay up the stairs, and they walked across the second deck, then up towards the wheel. As soon as they looked up and saw the wheel, they saw a young man about Melly or Tony's age standing behind it, with a black captain's coat and a black hat, with a white feather in it. He had dark brown short hair, and as he turned around, they saw that he had brown eyes and a dark, scruffy, short beard. Jay walked up to the man and shook his hand, then kind of sighed, hugging him like guys do. Tony walked over and shook his hand, but Melly stayed a few steps away. He locked eyes with Meli, and a mischievous smile came across his face. He eyed her up and down, and then took a few steps over to her. Tony stood right beside her, as did Jay, when the captain approached her. At first the captain didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at her with that cheeky smile on his face. It was like he was observing her. Tony saw this in him and immediately stood with his guard up. Jay hadn't noticed the captain was eyeing Meli, and was looking around the ship like a fascinated child. The captain took another step towards Meli, and put out a hand to her. She took his hand sternly, and shook it strongly, trying not to appear too weak. Finally he spoke, and when he did, his voice shook and rattled the entire ship. This was the great-grandson and descendant of Blackbeard himself. "You must be Jay's sister Melissa. Welcome aboard my ship. I'm Captain Caleb Blackwood." Meli shook his hand, and when she did, she had a vision of a deep purple energy within him that matched Tony's inner spark. His eyes lit up purple in the vision, and she jumped back and shook herself from it, then let go of his hand, looking up at Tony. "This is going to be one damn long vacation." The captain smiled as they looked back at him and stood there quietly. The sun was high in the sky, and the captain gave the orders, and they were off, sailing north on the Pacific Sea. A new adventure had begun, and no one was prepared for what would happen next. But off they sailed, across the sea of mystery. I told you this story wasn't really about the train. And that concludes Book 1 of the Castor Saga. Thank you very much for all of you who are listening and watching and subscribing and liking. I love you all very much. Book 2 is going to be coming out very, very soon. Pretty much as soon as I get my copy in the mail. I have it ordered and I'm just waiting to get it so I can read it to you. Until then, thank you very much. I love you all. Bye.